You've probably had to deviate from your plans at least once in life. Perhaps you have devoted yourself to a field which is the opposite of what you've initially been attracted to. Perhaps one seemingly unimportant choice has turned out to be a turning point in your life. Perhaps you're still a high school student hoping that all your plans will come to fruition. Clearly, we all realize that life is chaotic and brings us surprises. There will still be sudden twists and turns at every step. It was no different in Paul Kalanithi's case, where as neurosurgeon, little choices and unexpected circumstances can influence a life-death situation. His personal experience of terminal cancer further added to the potency of his knowledge. In this summary, you'll find out how to approach death gracefully, why striving is your defining characteristic, and how medical science can open up your eyes to yet undiscovered facets of your personality. Key Idea 1. Throughout his life, the author couldn't quench his thirst for neither books nor neuroscience. During his adolescence, Paul Kalanithi, the author, occupied himself with the masterpieces by Orwell, Camus, Sartre, Poe, and Thoreau. It was his passion that drew him to take literature as a major subject at college. But that is also where he deviated from the plan. He found another field that was of great interest to him during the summer before college: human biology. While preparing to leave for Stanford, Kalanithi's then-girlfriend sent him a book by Jeremy Levin named Satan, His Psychotherapy and Cure by the unfortunate Dr. Kessler, JSPS. He became enthralled by Levin's theory that the brain is just an evolutionary machine that drives and houses the human mind. This made him enroll in biology and neuroscience classes. While in college, searching for answers in literature and neuroscience, Kalanithi proceeded to pose significant questions like, what gives life sense? He believed literature was a representation of the mind's existence and the significance of mankind, coming to his beliefs by voracious reading. Although meaning is not a clear idea, he was inspired by authors such as T.S. Eliot and his work, The Wasteland. This book links the absence of meaning to loneliness, so Kalanithi concluded that true meaning is found in human interaction with one another. Literature, on the other hand, only provided one part of the equation, and Kalanithi realized he needed to continue his research in neuroscience. Analyzing the idea that the brain is the organ that allows our thinking and mind's processes, he was sure that our capacity to shape connections is directly influenced by our brains. His life events shaped his viewpoint. Kalanithi discovered that the residents at a health center for people with brain damage found it difficult to establish connections. That is, he was able to put two and two together: neuroscience to understand what's in the brain, and his deep understanding of meaning. Isn't such vigor enough to pursue a career in medicine? Paul went for it and understood not only the brain, but also life and death. Key Idea 2. While in medical school, Kalanithi came to know inside out about life, death, and meaning. Having successfully dealt with a burdensome application process, Kalanithi was accepted to Yale School of Medicine. Anatomy classes demonstrated to him hands-on a fine line between life and death. For several hours, he was dissecting bodies, cutting through skin and muscle, and sectioning bones as part of his practice. While the names and faces of the dead were concealed from the medical students, Kalanithi was still moved by them as though they were still alive. He discovered a pair of whole pills one day when he was carrying out laparotomy on a cadaver, a message to him that life might exist even among deceased's. However, Kalanithi's knowledge of life and death will stretch beyond these practice classes. While studying in a medical college, he was often confronted with situations that exemplified these profound ideas. For instance, during his posting at the labor and delivery ward, his first experience at the ward was about stillbirth. It occurred on his first day at the working place when he was informed about a young woman expecting twins, but had been admitted to the hospital due to premature labor. She was just 23.5 weeks in her pregnancy, and the physicians were struggling to hold the fetus alive. Unfortunately, there was no other option than an emergency cesarean. Kalanithi witnessed everything that subsequently took place. He looked on as strikingly small and nearly translucent babies were extracted from the womb. The babies died due to premature birth since their organisms were too weak and underdeveloped to sustain life. That is exactly where life and death intertwined for Kalanithi. Key Idea 3. Kalanithi's responsibilities in residency mounted along with his encounters with death. As Kalanithi was in his fourth year of medical school, he decided to choose neurosurgery as his specialty. That was by all means not a goal one could reach easily, yet he knew he was choosing the right path. Upon graduation from Yale, he began his 7-year residency at Stanford University. Quite soon, he found himself in a position that he had only seen flashes of during medical school. He was carrying out his duties under the burden of actual accountability. Matthew, a small child, was complaining of an acute headache one day. Kalanithi was given the task of determining the future plan for his treatment after an autopsy revealed he had a significant brain tumor. Matthew would have been a happy and healthy boy if the tumor was entirely removed. Still, there was a chance of future drastic aftermath, which could have happened even by a slight mistake due to its position in the hypothalamus, responsible for essential drives, including appetite and sleep. Kalanithi had to make a difficult choice. In the end, he decided to carry out an operation to extract the tumor. However, Kalanithi witnessed several operations ending up with patients dying during his first year of internship, whether in the hospital or among his own patients. He saw fatalities triggered by head injuries, bullet wounds, brawls, and car accidents. He witnessed an addict bleed to death when his blood no longer had the ability to perform the clotting functions. He also knew a medical specialist who worked in the nature of diseases department and still died of pneumonia. Eventually, her body arrived for autopsy at the same lab where she did research for years. As a result, residency didn't begin smoothly. The following years weren't a bed of roses either. Key Idea 4. Exhaustion from increased responsibility made it difficult for Kalanithi to keep up with the human aspect of his work. As he entered his second year of residency, Kalanithi was placed on call. So whenever there was an emergency, it was his duty to arrive first. Fortunately, the amount of commitment he was taking on rose in direct proportion with his competence level. But now, not like any time before, he needed to make his assumptions and decide whether salvation was possible. Once he witnessed a man with the severe brain injuries rushed into the surgery. While the medics were able to revive him, the patient's capacity to talk and eat independently was forever lost. There was little more that could be done to preserve his brain, and he had no other choice but to live the remaining years of his life in a mental hospital. So even though the patient was still breathing, Kalanithi was in two minds, whether it was the best option to save his friend. It wasn't the only reason. He started wondering if he was upholding his patient's fundamental humanity as he was operating for hours being run down and feeling the need to sleep. Understandably, he worked 100 hours a week, much as his colleagues, and he had little energy as he was forced to maintain the high standards. He started drinking fizzy energy drinks at night and sleeping a bit in his car before rushing back home. Consequently, his head started to hurt. Also, in the most distressing circumstances, he began to make his patients explain their concerns as fast as possible. When he needed to consult a lady who had just been diagnosed with brain cancer, he rushed through the dialogue, failing to concentrate. He waxed lyrical about the importance of surgery while neglecting the stress and anxiety the patient was suffering from. With hindsight, he was torn by shame and recalled why he had pursued medicine in the first place. It was then that he realized that good and reliable relationships with his patients actually made up the bulk of his job. Key Idea 5. Work in a neuroscience lab enabled Kalanithi to deal with growing responsibility. In his fourth year of residency, Kalanithi deviated from his specialization. It wasn't a U-turn, but work in the lab was rather different. He started working in a neuroscience lab at Stanford, where he studied to become a neuroscientist, a specialist of the nervous system, including the pathology and biochemistry of nerves and their clusters. Like you would expect, studying to be a neurosurgeon and a neuroscientist was both prestigious and challenging at the same time. Several neuroscientists in the lab were researching devices that might be of assistance to a disabled individual to control a machine or robotic limb through the power of thinking. Still, Kalanithi decided to research the opposite. He was really enthralled by neuromodulation, which entails devising methods for transmitting messages from robotic arms and legs to the brain. Technicians could develop cutting-edge legs and arms with the assistance of which the brain could adapt to the patient's environment. Of course, it's possible only if neuromodulation research is effective. An amputee traveling on rocky terrain, for example, will be able to step more quickly with the help of the installed mechanical foot. Kalanithi did not keep his work in the lab, although he found the job interesting. He came back to the hospital as the chief intern after more than a year apart. He was supposed to be fast and careful as a neurosurgeon at this point of his career, with greater pressure than ever before. He learned that technological performance was his moral duty. Positive actions will never be neglected because too much is at risk for patients and their loved ones. The ability to perform was crucial. Kalanithi, for example, discovered that Matthew, the young boy he had effectively cured years before, was now experiencing a rapid deterioration. He had to permanently remain at the hospital, as his condition was getting out of hand. During the surgery, Kalanithi accidentally destroyed a part of his brain. Key Idea 6. Bleak future unfurled before Kalanithi's eyes as he finished his residency. Kalanithi's work was not flawless, but still praiseworthy. After all, isn't it praiseworthy to press ahead while constantly withstanding enormous pressure? His stay in the current position, though, was coming to an end. He had gotten through all of the roadblocks and completed all of the tasks that had been assigned to him. He would also win coveted prizes and earned the admiration of the senior physicians with whom he worked side by side. In addition, Stanford had found a job that was best tailored to his qualifications. He was to serve in the hospital as a neurosurgeon neuroscientist specializing in neuromodulation. Kalanithi's life took a different direction with just almost half a year remaining in his residency. He had been losing weight and going through extreme back pain for a half a year, which was new to him. He headed to the hospital and got a few x-rays taken at his first consultation. His psychiatrist determined that it was due to his fatigue and working conditions. Kalanithi was suspicious, but he went back to work anyway. He was determined to complete his tenure, which he had worked too long to finish with. The agony, however, returned, this time in his chest. He continued getting slimmer until he was down to just 145 pounds. He also had a chronic cough. Kalanithi was well aware that his signs and symptoms pointed to cancer. In the end, his doctor examined the chest scan again and noticed that it had been unusually blurry. Kalanithi knew what it was. In next to no time, tumors had occupied his lungs. With spine and liver already deformed, cancer in its fatal stage was consuming him. Key Idea 7. Kalanithi could see life from a patient's perspective and pondered over becoming a dad. How would you behave if you knew you were to live a certain number of days or months? The question may seem too baffling to come up with an answer, and Kalanithi had little idea how to go on with his life and work when undergoing treatment. When getting in touch with his doctor, Emma, with whom he had a strong relationship, he expresses his dissatisfaction with not knowing how much time he got. Clearly, if he had decades to live, he would try to practice neurosurgery. On the other hand, if he only had a year or two, he would more likely devote his time to pursuing his writing vocation. For him, literature and writing were needed extremely, and Emma urged him to follow his gut on this matter. However, his practice left him perplexed about what he was to do being a patient and a medic. As a medic, he would search for information through medical books. On the opposite side, he was a patient, so he would like to turn to the literature he adored for metaphysical answers. At the same time, another big issue remained unanswered. He and his spouse Lucy, who had always been there for him, were in doubts on whether to conceive a child when they still could. So, shortly after finding out about the condition, both visited a sperm bank to hear about the best, safest choices. They both had always wanted to have children, but with Kalanithi's life expectancy so unclear, they were no longer confident. They eventually went for life. Kalanithi's sperm was frozen before cancer treatment began, and in the course of time, his wife Lucy got pregnant. Key Idea 8. Kalanithi lived long enough to meet his daughter. Lucy gave birth to Elizabeth Acadia, or just Katie, on July 4, 2014. By this time, Kalanithi's health was deteriorating rapidly. Kalanithi had been undergoing treatment in hospital and was of weak health by the time Lucy went into labor. He got a bit better when recovering. However, he was so emaciated and couldn't rely on his legs to hold him when in the delivery room, being unable to rise while Lucy was delivering a daughter. After this, all of them returned home. He was still shaky and thin and failed to perform basic tasks such as standing, writing, eating, or drinking. Kalanithi's cancer then deteriorated dramatically during Christmas time. when Katie was 5 months old. The cancer became resistant to therapy. Neither the medications nor the chemotherapy was any longer efficient, leading to more weakness and loss of energy over the months that followed. Despite the profound grief, his family was able to enjoy certain aspects of life, such as hosting dinner parties with friends and playing with their little daughter. Kalanithi, on the other hand, became seriously affected by February, becoming increasingly exhausted and nauseous. He did not want to take any meals at all in the end. His hospital tests showed that the disease had expanded not only to his lungs, but also to his brain, with tumors growing there as well. Kalanithi then had no doubt his brain would be badly affected. He would no longer be able to think straight, analyze, and find something worth living for. Key Idea 9. Lucy, Kalanithi's wife, had mixed feelings upon his passing. Kalanithi could no longer breathe properly without medical aid when his daughter was only 8 months old. He knew that breathing support couldn't sustain him forever. He begged to be taken off of the life support system after debating care choices, knowing that a ventilator would make it impossible for him to live without it after. Kalanithi saw it this way. Keeping his heart pumping had no sense because the time he had left was slipping away. He was taken off the respirator system and given morphine to relieve his suffering within hours, all with his family with him at the moment. People began to arrive following each other to express their credit and show their affection for Kalanithi. He then closed his eyes and just breathed nervously and uneasy. Kalanithi died at the age of 37 on March 9, 2015, at about 9 p.m. Lucy, Kalanithi's widow, recalls her last happy moments with Kalanithi as being packed with affection and purpose, despite being overwhelmed with the loss and sadness of her husband's passing. She and Kalanithi had been closer than ever in the months leading up to his death, which can be compared only to their first years together while still in college. His relatives, too, relied on one another for support. At the hospital, Kalanithi's parents and brothers will entertain him, Lucy, and their daughter all together. They would talk sports, read aloud from novels, and eat his mother's homemade Indian dosa. In the end, Lucy found peace in the fact that she was about to secure the publication of her husband's unfinished book. But Kalanithi's book is complete in the sense that it captures his experience as he approached mortality, though it wasn't quite finished in the manner he had expected despite working hard on it, for as long as his deteriorating health would carry him. When breath becomes air was a way for Kalanithi to express himself, Lucy recounts. He could show others how to come to terms with death and its inevitability as well as how to live to the fullest when already faced with it. Final thoughts. The book recounts the story of Paul Kalanithi, an avid reader and a neurosurgeon. His life seemed to be revolving around life, death, and meaning. This is his quest for meaning, combat against mortality, and tale of human kindness in a remarkable style.